Welcome to the Deconstructionist Deep Dive.
The podcast that doesn't just accept the story.
We break it
We examine the pieces.
and expose the machinery inside. Let's dive in.
What if everything you've been taught about self-improvement isn't just wrong, but is actually designed to keep you running on a treadmill? You know, a treadmill of perpetual inadequacy.
That's really the core question we're tackling in this deep dive today. And it's a heavy one. We're not here just to offer quick fixes or bash a motivational speaker.
No, not at all.
We're actually taking the analytical scalpel to the entire modern self-help industry. We're dissecting this pervasive ideology. It looks empowering on the surface, doesn't it?
It really does. But underneath, it seems built on these, coercive axioms.
Exactly. Coercive.
And we're using critical analysis here, looking at texts that really deconstruct these self-help narratives. We want to expose the underlying power structures, the ones that actually benefit from you constantly striving. Our mission, really, is to get a sharp analytical understanding of exactly why this movement, which promises all this freedom, so often leads to just persistent anxiety. And that crushing feeling, that you're just never quite enough.
Mm-hmm. You, the listener, you're looking for knowledge that clarifies maybe not what you should do next, but why you feel so compelled to constantly do something in the first place.
Yeah. Where does that pressure come from?
So we're going to start by laying out the foundational framework, the story, basically, the story we're all being sold. Okay, so let's unpack this core ideology. The whole modern self-help structure, it really rests on kind of a shaky tripod. 3 foundational axioms.
Mm-hmm.
And if you accept these 3 premises, even implicitly, you've kind of already locked yourself into this system of constant striving.
Absolutely. And the first one, maybe the most manipulative, is what we can call the change axiom.
And change axiom.
Yeah. This is the absolute belief, the conviction that focused, intense individual effort guarantees improvement. It says success is just, a necessary belief away, or enough grit, or the right technique.
And crucially, how does it frame failure?
Well, failure gets totally redefined. It's never seen as like a sign of structural problems or just bad luck or real external limits. No. Failure is always evidence that you didn't put in enough effort.
Right.
Or your visualization wasn't strong enough, or you had some kind of moral lack of belief in yourself.
It's the ultimate deflection mechanism, isn't it? Like, say you're working 2 jobs, maybe 3, and you still can't afford rent in a major city.
A very real scenario for many.
Totally. According to this change axiom, it's not the housing crisis that failed you. Oh, no. It's that your time management was sloppy. Or maybe your mindset wasn't aggressive enough. Or you just failed to, manifest the right apartment.
Right. The systemic issue, the massive economic reality, just gets instantly metabolized into personal failure. It's all on you.
Which then ties into the second pillar.
Yes. Building right on that is conscious value construction. This is the mandate, the command almost, that individuals must consciously choose and forge their own value systems.
You have to build them yourself.
Exactly. You're told you must actively overcome your existing conditioning, whether that's family stuff, cultural background, whatever. You're pressured to become the CEO of your own life.
A CEO of you, Incorporated.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Selecting values like discipline or hustle or resilience, almost like picking items off a shelf.
And the implication if you just sort of accept your environment or your existing values,
then the implication is clear. You're weak, you're aimless, you're destined for mediocrity. So this constant demand for selection, for choosing, it generates this huge psychological pressure.
you have to be hyper aware of your internal state, constantly monitoring, constantly choosing.
Which brings us straight to the third axiom, and this one is arguably the most dangerous. It's personal responsibility, primacy, or a term we find useful is hyperagency.
Hyperagency. Explain that a bit.
It's the conviction that embracing an almost limitless individual agency, believing you can control almost everything through sheer will, is the optimal strategy.
So all external factors, the economy, your health, random chance, they're all rendered secondary.
Secondary, exactly. Secondary to your individual choice and your will.
And what's so fascinating, and maybe insidious, is the allure of that. Hyperagency feels incredibly empowering, right? For maybe 3 seconds.
Oh, absolutely. It hooks you with that feeling of control. If Stoicism teaches us to focus only on what we can control.
Right, the dichotomy of control.
Hyperagency is sort of the belief that we should strive to control even the things we definitely cannot.
Yeah.
Like, global markets or political shifts.
Sounds exhausting.
It is. And the immediate consequence is isolation. Because if you are the sole architect of your destiny, if it's all down to your choices.
Then you have no shared reality when things go wrong. No shared excuse.
Precisely. When the inevitable external constraint hits a recession, a pandemic, a health crisis, there's no room left for structural critique. You just have to hyper-optimize your way out of it.
And blame only yourself if you can't achieve total control over uncontrollable events.
Exactly. It locks you in. Hashtag tag 1.2, the psychological underpinnings. And that isolation, that self-blame you just mentioned, that's actually key to keeping the whole system running. The ideology needs an internal framework, a set of beliefs inside your head to maintain this constant anxious striving.
Okay, so how does it do that? Where does it start internally?
It starts with how it frames identity itself. Identity gets reduced to this idea of narrative primacy.
Narrative primacy.
Yeah, the idea that yourself is purely just a story you tell yourself. It's something constantly crafted, infinitely revisable.
So if you're unhappy, you don't need to change your, say, your job or your circumstances.
Nope. You just need to edit the script, change the story you're telling yourself about your job.
Wow. That turns existence into, like, a perpetual writing assignment.
Doesn't it? And it gives you this illusion of tower, I can rewrite my story. But it also sets you up for the fall, because this narrative approach is often preceded by something called the average human axiom.
The average human axiom. Okay, what's that hook?
Self-help often hooks you in with a dose of, let's call it, forced humility. It starts by getting you to accept mediocrity as your starting point.
You are average, your habits are probably bad, your mindset is flawed. That kind of thing.
Exactly that. You're basically average, maybe even below average.
Okay, so that's the perfect setup, right? You feel a bit bad about yourself, maybe inadequate, which makes you receptive to a solution.
Precisely. But immediately, this supposed mediocrity is paired with neuroplasticity as the escape mechanism.
Ah, the magic bullet.
Kind of. You're told, yes, okay, you're average now, but your brain is infinitely malleable. Your potential is limitless. You can rewire everything.
It's a classic bait and switch then.
Totally. The premise is humility, accept your average. But the standard required for redemption is absolute exceptionalism.
You start average, but the goal is literally to become non-average, non-mediocre, infinitely self-improved. The goalposts aren't just moved, they're launched into orbit.
Right, and this perpetual process, this constant improvement, defines your whole existence. Skill acquisition becomes life purpose.
So like existential meaning, the point of your life, is derived almost solely from developing competencies.
Pretty much. Whether you're mastering, I don't know, advanced Excel, or optimizing your sleep down to the minute, or learning to code, or meditating perfectly, if you're not actively acquiring new skills, optimizing something,
Then your life lacks meaning. Your value is tied only to your productivity.
that's the underlying message. Your life gains value primarily when you are productive, when you are improving.
Wow.
And here's the really clever bit. The movement is fully aware of the hedonic treadmill. They know this stuff.
The idea that achievements only bring temporary happiness.
Exactly. They acknowledge that external wins, the promotion, the new car, the optimized body, provide only fleeting satisfaction. But instead of saying, okay, maybe we should reject this endless chase, they weaponize that awareness. They use the fact that satisfaction is temporary to justify the need for perpetual self-optimization. The striving itself becomes the goal.
So the temporary nature of the reward justifies endlessly seeking the next reward.
Precisely. It ensures you never actually stop running on the treadmill because the running is framed as the point. It guarantees you keep consuming their content, their solutions. Hashtag tag 1.3, the slogan toolkit.
Okay, so to keep the user running, to keep them motivated on that treadmill, the system needs more than just axioms. It needs, like, quick hits, emotional boosts, slogans.
Exactly. These are the operational principles. They serve as emotional reinforcements designed to bypass critical thought and just give you that immediate feeling of empowerment or focus.
These aren't just motivational quotes, then. They're functional tools within the ideology.
Definitely. Tools for enforcing focus, reducing cognitive dissonance. One of the most direct ones we analyzed is that resilience metaphor. Boos don't block dunks.
Right, I've heard variations of that. Seems harmless. Just means ignore the haters, right?
On the surface, yes, it's about persistence against negativity. But its true function, when you unpack it within this ideology, is maybe a bit darker.
How so?
It offers that immediate emotional payoff, I'm strong, I'm self-reliant, while simultaneously encouraging a total disregard for almost any external judgment.
So not just haters, but potentially valid criticism too.
Potentially, yes. Imagine a colleague gives you some valid constructive feedback on why a project failed. The ideology, through this slogan, encourages you to treat that feedback like a boo.
Just noise to be ignored.
Yeah,
Because only your inner belief, your dunk attempt matters.
exactly. It helps create this echo chamber of the self, insulating you from potentially useful external input.
Okay. What else is in the toolkit?
Then there's the strategy for dealing with overwhelm, which is huge in modern life. It's sometimes framed around the thousand doors problem.
The idea that there are just too many choices. Which productivity system, which diet, which guru?
Precisely. Modern self-help presents this infinite buffet of choices, which can be paralyzing. So this slogan, or principle, acts as focus enforcement. It's designed to reduce that cognitive dissonance from overwhelming choice by telling you, just pick one door. Pick one thing and block out all the rest. Don't worry about the other 999 doors.
So it narrows your scope deliberately.
Yes. You might be feeling overwhelmed by the systemic chaos of modern life, the complexity of global economics or climate change or career uncertainty, but the slogan forces you to focus only on the internal task.
Like, don't worry about the world falling apart, just write the next chapter of your novel. Or optimize your morning routine.
Exactly. It simplifies the terrifyingly complex external world into a simple, seemingly manageable internal project called you. Focus on what you can control.
Which sounds empowering again, but actually ignores the bigger picture.
Right. And finally, there's detachment as liberation. This is presented as a kind of risk mitigation strategy.
How did that work?
The idea is if you don't attach your self-worth, your ego, to the outcome of your efforts, then failure can't really hurt you. Failures just become data points. They're not personal setbacks. They're just information for the next attempt.
Okay, that sounds actually kind of healthy. Isn't that a bit like Stoicism?
It borrows the language, but the function here is different.
Hold on, you have to ask, who does this detachment truly serve within this system?
Okay.
Remember the change axiom.
Yeah.
Effort guarantees results. If your focused, hyper-optimized effort fails, which it inevitably will sometimes, you can't blame the axiom itself because that would break the whole system's foundation.
Right. You can't say, maybe effort doesn't always work.
Exactly. So instead, the failure gets internalized through the detachment lens. You must have simply failed to detach sufficiently. Your ego was still too invested. You didn't treat it purely as data.
I see. So the detachment isn't really liberation from the system. It's a psychological safety net for the system. It protects the core premise that individual effort is supreme from ever being truly challenged by the reality of failure. It keeps you blaming yourself, even for your detachment skills.
Okay, so now we've laid out the foundations, the axioms, the slogans. Let's take that scalpel you mentioned earlier and really start carving away at the internal consistency. Because once you look beneath that shiny veneer of confidence and control, well, the self-help movement seems riddled with philosophical contradiction.
Oh, absolutely. And anxious paradoxes that actually keep the user, keep you perpetually unsettled. Always searching for the next book, the next seminar, the next solution. Hashtag 2.1 philosophical contradictions. The core conflict, I think, lies in this massive tension between the self-help narrative and, well, deeper philosophical traditions. The system demands a coherent narrative, right? It needs a stable, reliable CEO self to do all this optimizing work.
You need a solid eye to be in charge of the improvement project.
Exactly. But this goal of a stable, unified identity, it directly contradicts some major philosophical concepts that have been around for centuries.
Like what, for example?
Well, think about the Buddhist concept of anatman, or non-self. Or even postmodern ideas about a fragmented, fluid identity, one that's shaped entirely by language, by social context, by power structures.
So if those philosophies are right, if the I isn't a fixed thing, but more like a constantly shifting illusion,
then the entire self-help project kind of collapses, doesn't it? It needs a central, reliable I to initiate the change, track the progress, execute the plan. If there's no fixed self, who's doing the helping?
the whole thing unravels. It needs a stable subject to sell the product to.
Precisely. Then there's that huge agency overstatement we talked about earlier, the insistence on hyper-agency. It just completely ignores or aggressively minimizes real material and biological constraints.
Your genetics, the neighborhood you grew up in, institutional biases, just sheer random luck.
All brushed aside, or framed as mere obstacles for your heroic willpower to overcome.
And you mentioned the contrast with Stoicism before.
Yeah, the tension is really visible there. Classic Stoicism advises you to clearly distinguish what you can control from what you cannot, and then practice acceptance towards the latter. Find peace in that distinction.
But self-help often pushes you the other way.
It insists you must constantly strive to influence, to optimize, even that which is clearly beyond your immediate control. Like trying to personally will the stock market up. It sets you up for this constant existential exhaustion because you're essentially being told to fight reality itself.
And that bait and switch we discussed earlier, the average exception.
Let's revisit that, yeah, the bait and switch logic. We talked about how the initial you are average premise is the hook. It creates the need.
Makes you receptive.
Right. But the premise of redemption, the escape route, relies entirely on this claim of exceptional neuroplasticity and limitless potential, which, in practice, sets an utterly unattainable, unrealistic standard for most people.
So you're told, be happy with who you are, maybe accept your flaws.
But immediately, the real goal becomes, no, actually, be utterly exceptional, optimize away those flaws, achieve peak performance in every single measurable metric.
The bar isn't just raised, it's vaporized into the stratosphere. It guarantees you'll always feel like you're falling short. Hashtag tag 2.2, the anxious paradoxes. Okay, so beyond the philosophical clashes, there are paradoxes baked right into the internal mechanics of the system. These seem almost circular, like they're specifically designed to generate the very anxiety the system claims it can solve.
That's a great way to put it. Let's start with the self-defeating nature of the tools themselves.
You mean the apps, the journals, the courses?
Yeah, this is what we could call the tool problem paradox. The prescribed solution, deep self-awareness, constant internal monitoring, using optimization apps, consuming endless self-help content. This very activity is simultaneously identified, often implicitly, as the primary source of the user's anxiety.
Can you give an example of that?
Okay, imagine wearing like heart rate monitor, a sleep tracker, a mood journal, 234/7, with the explicit expectation that you must constantly find flaws in the data, find things to fix.
Okay.
The very act of hyper-monitoring your supposed flaws becomes the thing that prevents you from ever feeling content or relaxed. The more you try to meticulously optimize your sleep and mood,
The more anxious you become about the fact that your sleep score was only 78 last night, not 95.
yeah,
Or that your mood dipped below optimal.
exactly. The self-help tool creates the very problem, perpetual inadequacy, constant anxiety about performance that it claims it will solve. It's a perfect loop.
Wow. Okay, what other paradoxes are at play?
We also really need to talk about the value construction fallacy. Remember how the system mandates that you consciously choose your values?
Yeah, become the CEO of your values.
Well, that assumes something huge. It assumes there's a pre-existing autonomous subject, you just sitting there, fully capable of rationally, cleanly choosing values from a menu.
And what's the fallacy there?
It totally ignores the deep, often invisible forces of conditioning. Things like family expectations, cultural narratives, media saturation, advertising. These shape our deepest desires long before we ever consciously choose them.
So if you think you just woke up one morning and rationally decided to value, say, hustle culture,
You're probably mistaken. As thinkers like Foucault might argue, that value was likely constructed for you by invisible power systems, economic systems, cultural systems that benefit from your endless labor. Your conscious choice is often just the convenient rationalization of a desire that was actually imposed on you.
that's a heavy thought. Your choices might not be your own.
It challenges the very core of the hyper-agency premise. And finally, there's this deep, fundamental determinism-agency conflict. Modern self-help's prescription of radical individual hyper-agency clashes violently with, well, pretty much any historical or sociological model that suggests broader forces shape our lives.
Like what kind of models?
Think about cyclical historical models, like the Hegelian dialectic, or maybe more commonly, the Marxist critique. These argue that human activity, human thought, even our consciousness, is significantly constrained or even determined by historical forces, by material conditions, by our place in the class structure.
Okay, so simplify that conflict for us.
Basically, the self-help system tells you, the individual, that you can transcend history, class, biology, material reality just by choosing a better mindset. Just think positive.
Right.
But the Marxist critique, for example, would suggest that your consciousness, the very things you desire, the thoughts you have access to, is largely an effect of your material position in the world, your historical context.
So one says transcend history, and the other says you're a product of history.
Exactly. You're told to escape the very reality that fundamentally shaped you. This conflict practically guarantees anxiety because the system sets an impossible goal. achieving individual escape velocity from the gravity of your own context. Hashtag 2.3 across ideological connections. And, to really understand how self-help functions today, it helps to see its DNA, its historical roots. These ideas didn't just spring out of nowhere.
Okay, like what? Where did these concepts come from?
Well, take the intense focus on personal responsibility, for instance. That's not some brand new capitalist invention. It's got deep roots, and it's intimately linked to ideas like Calvinist predestination.
Predestination. How does that connect?
In some interpretations of Calvinism, material success, prosperity, was seen as a possible sign of being one of God's elect. So if you succeeded, maybe you were chosen for salvation. If you failed, well, you clearly weren't working hard enough, weren't pious enough, weren't demonstrating your worthiness.
So work hard to prove you're saved, essentially. And your success is the proof.
Kind of. It moralized economic outcomes. Success became a sign of inner virtue, failure, a sign of inner deficiency.
And the critical counter-perspective to that, the one self-help tends to ignore.
That would absolutely be the Marxist critique. This perspective argues that this whole moralization of success and failure is basically bourgeois ideology. It serves to mask structural inequality.
That doesn't mask it.
It tells the person struggling in the gig economy, your lack of wealth is your moral failing, instead of saying your lack of wealth might be a predictable feature of an exploitative economic system that requires cheap, flexible labor to function. It neatly diverts attention away from any need for systemic change and puts all the blame back on the individual.
Very convenient for the system itself.
Extremely convenient. Similarly, that modern drive for limitless self-improvement, the constant optimization.
Yeah. Where does that come from?
It's arguably just a secularized version of the Protestant work ethic, as Max Weber described it. That obsession with efficiency, productivity, constant striving, the deep discomfort with idleness, the refusal to simply be, that's a powerful cultural inheritance in many Western societies.
It's like a moral obligation to always be productive, always be improving yourself.
Exactly. It's deeply ingrained.
And what's a counter perspective to that relentless striving? Something that offers a different way.
Oh, a beautiful and essential counter is the Taoist concept of Wu Wei.
Wu Wei.
Yeah, it's often translated as effortless action or non-doing. Wu Wei is basically the philosophical antithesis of the hyper-striving self-help mandate. It suggests that excessive effort, forcing things, is often counterproductive.
So harmony comes from working with the natural flow.
Yeah.
Not trying to violently reshape your biology or your circumstances.
Precisely. It suggests that sometimes the highest achievement, the most effective action, comes from what looks like non-action, from letting things unfold, from aligning with the way things are. And of course, that idea absolutely terrifies a system built on selling you constant monetized action.
Okay, so we've seen the internal contradictions, the philosophical tensions, the historical roots. Now let's really sharpen that scalpel. We're moving from just contradictions to what look like intentional structural deceptions.
Right. The critical mechanisms by which this whole ideology actually maintains its power, generates profit, and basically turns your personal striving into someone else's gain.
We've identified 4 key deceptions here. Let's start with the first one. Deception number 1, the malleability myth. This is fundamentally about biological oversimplification, isn't it?
Yes. It's the pervasive assumption that you can completely reshape your limits, your personality, your core being, almost entirely through sheer quantified willpower. It treats the human self like it's infinitely plastic, like putty.
Just needs enough focused effort, the right technique, maybe the right supplement.
Exactly. And the historical parallel here is pretty clear. It's basically that Puritan prosperity theology we mentioned, but stripped of the explicitly religious language, secularized.
So instead of praying to God for grace to get rich,
you now pray to the gods of neuroplasticity and biohacking to erase your biological constraints, your natural inclinations, your limitations.
Okay, so who benefits from propagating this myth? What's the power beneficiary?
Well, a major beneficiary is undoubtedly flexible labor markets. Modern capitalism increasingly requires workers who are adaptable, willing to constantly retrain, pivot, take on new roles with minimal friction.
And the malleability myth supports that need perfectly.
Absolutely. If a corporation needs you to suddenly learn a complex new software or completely change your job description, the ideology assures you that you are infinitely capable of rapid retraining. And if you fail to meet those shifting demands,
you blame your own poor grit, your lack of neuroagility, not the unstable, demanding nature of the market itself. You internalize the systemic failure as personal inadequacy.
Right. And the freedom impact on the individual. It's pretty devastating.
How so?
Because it pathologizes natural limitations, things that are just part of the human condition, like introversion requiring downtime, or the simple fact that we need deep restorative rest, or that our brains have finite processing speed. These are all subtly reframed
As flaws.
as moral failures, essentially, as weaknesses that must be optimized away through sheer effort. You end up feeling perpetually anxious because you're literally fighting your own nature, your own biology, under the banner of self-improvement. Okay, deception number 2. We've touched on this, but let's label it the average exception. This is a classic logical bait and switch.
Right. You're average, but you can be exceptional trick.
Exactly. And we can structure this, maybe provocatively, as a kind of noble lie in the Platonic sense.
Yeah.
You know, a fiction told for the supposed good of society and to maintain social stability and order.
How does it function as a noble lie?
Well, it's this ultimate psychological manipulation, really. First, it induces artificial humility.
Yeah.
It insists you start from a place of being average, maybe even flawed. This breaks you down a bit and makes you receptive.
Yeah.
But then, immediately, it offers this incredibly grueling redemption path, one that requires truly exceptional, non-average effort, discipline, and optimization. It plants the belief that anyone can escape the average crowd if only they push harder than everyone else in that crowd.
Which is statistically
Oh,
unlikely, right?
extremely unlikely by definition,
Yeah.
but the belief is key. So who's the main power beneficiary of people believing this?
Let me guess. The status quo.
Bingo. It's the maintenance of the meritocracy myth. If everyone truly believes that success is purely the result of individual exceptional effort and that anyone can achieve it because we all supposedly start from this average place,
Then the existing socioeconomic hierarchy seems perfectly justified. The winners deserve it because they tried harder. The losers just didn't optimize enough.
exactly. The belief in this individual escape route keeps the masses striving within the system, aiming for an impossible statistical outcome for most. It justifies the failures of the many and legitimizes the success of the few, masking any structural advantages or disadvantages.
All right, deception number 3. This one feels very current. Fulfillment commodification. You're saying this operates through false necessity.
Yes, it takes that Protestant work ethic, the moral duty to be productive, and fuses it seamlessly with what Mark Fisher called capitalist realism, the idea that capitalism is the only viable system.
Okay, so how does that create a false necessity?
It subtly creates a new requirement for basic psychological well-being. We are increasingly taught, implicitly and explicitly, that things like contentment, peace of mind, even happiness are not, default human states or rights.
They're not just available?
No, they're presented as commodities, things you have to earn or purchase either through your labor, your productivity, or through targeted internal optimization techniques and products.
So you can't just exist and feel reasonably content. You have to achieve contentment through optimizing your gratitude journal or hitting your mindfulness streak.
That's the insidious message. And the result is we see a product for practically every human emotion or state. Journaling courses to earn gratitude. Mindfulness apps to purchase focus. Sleep trackers to achieve rest.
So the power beneficiary here is pretty obvious.
Blatantly obvious. The entire multi-billion-dollar self-help industry and the vast, sprawling influencer economy that feeds off it. Their entire business model depends on manufacturing a perpetual sense of inadequacy.
An inadequacy that only their next book, their new 5-step program, their patented biohacking gadget, or their latest online course can possibly solve.
Exactly. Their product is the solution to the problem. They helped manufacture the feeling that you're not quite good enough as you are.
And the freedom impact. How does this affect our sense of freedom?
It fundamentally makes contentment conditional on perpetual productivity and consumption. Rest, for example, stops being an inherent human right or need.
It becomes what?
It becomes transactional. It's reframed as merely a way to recharge your internal battery so you can get back to being productive again. Optimize your rest to optimize your work. This cycle ensures you never truly feel whole or satisfied just being. You're always chasing the next conditional level of better, always needing the next fix. Okay, this brings us to the fourth and perhaps the ultimate deception. It ties everything together. We're calling it voluntary servitude. And this functions primarily as a false dichotomy.
Voluntary servitude. That sounds like a paradox in itself. Explain that. Where does the term come from?
It's a concept with historical weight, notably explored by the 16th century writer Etienne de la Boétie. He was fascinated by why people seem to willingly consent to their own domination. The mechanism here in the context of self-help is that the perceived choice to strive, to optimize, to hustle, it masks a deeper systemic coercion.
Okay, break that down. How does the choice mask coercion?
Think about it. You feel like you are freely choosing to work 80 hours a week, right? Or check work emails at midnight, or aggressively optimize your sleep schedule down to the minute. It feels like your decision.
Yeah, people talk about loving the grind.
Exactly. But is that choice truly free? Or is it made under the intense pressure of economic precarity, the fear of job loss in an insecure market, the fear of falling behind on rent or mortgage payments, the fear of losing health insurance tied to employment? The system often doesn't give you a real alternative, but to participate intensely.
So the choice isn't between striving and not striving, but between striving and potentially falling off a cliff.
That's the false dichotomy. The coercion is structural, economic, and self-help. It acts like the software update for the system. It makes you feel good about complying with these pressures. It reframes the necessary grind as a virtuous personal choice, an act of self-empowerment.
And things like detachment.
Detachment in this light isn't true liberation from the system's demands. It's merely a psychological pressure valve for the system. It makes the coercion more bearable, psychologically manageable. It tells you to be grateful for the opportunity to strive so incredibly hard, even if it's burning you out.
So the ultimate power beneficiary is?
Capital. Plain and simple. Why would corporations or capital need to invest heavily in managers cracking whips when the workers themselves have fully internalized the drive to optimize, to push themselves relentlessly?
Self-help turns the individual into their own unpaid, ruthless efficiency manager.
Precisely. You are, in a very real sense, volunteering to manage your own exploitation more effectively, all while believing it's the path to freedom. So, okay, if the system is built on these shaky axioms, riddled with contradictions, and relies on these structural deceptions, how does it keep going? How does it manage to protect itself from criticism and ensure that people keep complying?
Yeah, how does it maintain itself? What are the prison bars made of if they're not physical?
Well, it builds these really sophisticated layers of immunity, both internal psychological defenses and external social reinforcements. Hashtag 4.1 psychological immunity.
Okay, let's start with the internal stuff, the psychological defenses. What's the system's first line of defense when someone starts to question it?
The first shield is what we can call valid excuse neutralization. This is really clever. Systemic barriers, things like economic downturns, crippling student loan debt, blatant workplace discrimination, lack of affordable childcare, these are often acknowledged even performatively by the system itself.
So the gurus might say, yeah, the economy is tough right now, or yes, bias exists.
Exactly. They'll nod to the reality of it. But then they immediately dismiss the operational relevance of those barriers to you as an individual actor.
How does that work? What's the message?
The underlying message is basically this. Yes, okay, the system is fundamentally broken. It's unfair. It might even be rigged against the average person. We see that. We acknowledge your pain, but you still must succeed within it anyway, using your hyperagency, using our techniques.
Wow, so it creates this kind of intellectual dead end.
Totally. You can't logically argue against the system's brokenness because they just agreed with you that it's broken. But crucially, you are still held personally liable, personally responsible for failing to overcome that brokenness through sheer individual effort. Your failure is still yours alone.
That's insidious. Okay, what's the next layer of psychological defense?
Next up, we see insecurity weaponization. This often plays out in relational contexts like partnerships or families.
How does that work? Give an example.
Okay, say a conflict arises. Maybe one partner brings up feelings of neglect because the other is constantly working, constantly optimizing, totally caught up in the hustle. Maybe they raise issues of emotional labor imbalance.
A common scenario.
Very common. The self-help ideology provides a ready-made defense mechanism. The issue is immediately reframed not as a problem with the striving individual's behavior or priorities, but as a problem of personal insecurity management on the part of the person raising the concern.
So the person working 80 hours says, it's not that my work-life balance is terrible.
It's that you are feeling insecure about our time together, and that insecurity is something you need to work on. It's a flaw you need to optimize internally.
Wow. So it deflects completely.
Completely. It's a powerful way to shut down criticism. The focus is instantly pulled away from the potentially problematic behavior, or the systemic pressures causing it, or the actual relational dynamics, and placed solely onto the critical partner's perceived emotional regulation failure.
Making them the problem for noticing the problem.
Precisely. And finally, to keep the pressure cooker on high, there's the use of apocalyptic determinism.
Apocalyptic. That sounds dramatic.
It is. It's the creation of a constant sense of impending doom and urgency. You hear messages like, if you don't change now, you'll be left behind forever. Tomorrow might be too late to start. The world is changing fast, and you need to optimize just to survive.
Creates a feeling of panic almost.
Yes, this anxiety-inducing narrative effectively bypasses any desire for slow, careful, critical analysis of the system's long-term viability or the potential need for gradual structural societal changes. Instead, it forces immediate, individual, optimized action now.
You feel like you have to run faster and faster on the treadmill just to stay alive, just to avoid falling off the back into oblivion. Hashtag tagged 4.2 social enforcement structures.
And these internal psychological defenses don't operate in a vacuum. They are massively reinforced by public pressure, by social structures that turn private striving into a kind of publicly enforced spectacle.
Okay, how does society reinforce this?
Well, one powerful amplifier, especially recently, is what we could call Web3 amplification, or just more broadly, the financialization of everything.
How does that connect, like crypto and NFTs?
Yeah, think about contexts where financial stakes are tied directly and publicly to personal optimization and performance. Think of the performative grind of hustle culture online, or certain investment ecosystems where demonstrating your constant effort and success is literally part of the marketing strategy.
So when your money, or potential future money, is on the line based on how well you perform optimization.
Social pressure to comply skyrockets. Your net worth, your social standing within that community, your perceived value, it all gets tangled up with your public commitment to striving, to optimizing, to winning.
So you can't just fail quietly anymore.
Increasingly, no. Your failure might be public, it's financialized, it's searchable, the stakes are higher.
And this is obviously made worse by
the social media comparison economy, absolutely. Platforms are designed to manufacture validation as a scarce, desirable resource. This fuels this toxic, almost compulsive need for the perpetual display of optimization.
the perfect morning routine posted online, the tracked workout stats shared, the highly curated vacation photos that still somehow manage to look productive or optimized.
Exactly. You feel pressure to constantly demonstrate that you are productive, healthy, rested, successful, and thriving even, or perhaps especially if you are actually falling apart inside. It's performance.
And are there broader social structures that reinforce this focus on the individual?
Definitely. Structurally, the entire system places a heavy, often unexamined emphasis on the nuclear family priority, or maybe just the individual or coupled unit as the primary site and accountability mechanism for all this optimization.
How does that exclude other models?
The relentless focus is almost always on individual achievement, or maybe achievement within the tightly bound family unit, optimizing your kids, optimizing your relationship for productivity, optimizing household consumption. This structure tends to implicitly and sometimes explicitly exclude or devalue alternative fulfillment models.
Like what?
Like models that aren't based on capitalist consumption or individual striving. Think about monastic traditions, communal living experiments, queer-chosen families, or any setup that might prioritize deep relational connection, collective meaning, or mutual aid over hyper-individual measurable success.
So the optimized nuclear family becomes the ideal microcosm of the optimized capitalist state.
You could certainly argue that, yeah. It reinforces the individual small unit as the main engine of striving and consumption. Okay, so we've done a lot of deconstruction. We've torn apart the machinery. But the ultimate goal of this deep dive isn't just to leave everyone feeling hopeless or cynical about the system.
Right. It's about providing an intellectual pathway out. What does actual freedom look like once you recognize the treadmill and decide to consciously step off? How do you reject these core premises of inadequacy?
Exactly. We need alternative frameworks. Hashtag tag 5.1 philosophical alternatives. So what kind of concepts can help us? We need ideas that radically reject that hyper-individualism and hyper-agency we dissected earlier.
Where can we look for those?
One powerful alternative is Ubuntu philosophy. It's a collective philosophy originating from Southern Africa, often summarized by the phrase, I am because we are.
I am because we are. That's a direct challenge to the individualistic core of self-help.
Absolutely direct. It's a radical counter-narrative. Instead of claiming individual success is paramount, Ubuntu foregrounds interdependence, community, collective meaning. It shifts the burden of striving and the pain of failure from the isolated self onto the supportive community.
So if the self is fundamentally defined by the community,
Then, your failures aren't just your personal problem, They're shared problems requiring shared resources and support. And your successes aren't just for you, they're a shared benefit for the whole group. It completely changes the calculation of effort, reward, and meaning.
That's a profound shift. What else?
Another really crucial philosophical shift can come from engaging with Buddhist dependent origination or pratityasamutpada.
Dependent origination. How does that help break free?
Instead of assigning personal fault for everything, I failed because I didn't try hard enough, this philosophy encourages you to see the interconnectedness of causes and conditions. Things happen, outcomes arise, because of a complex networked system of factors, not usually because of a singular moral failure of individual will.
So it moves the focus from personal blame towards understanding complex systems.
Exactly, which can offer immense psychological relief. It allows for compassion, both for yourself and for others caught in difficult circumstances. It counters the simplistic blame game of hyperagency.
Okay. And maybe something more geared towards systemic challenge.
For those who resonate with that approach, there's the challenging, often controversial intellectual current of accelerationism, in some interpretations at least.
Accelerationism. What's the core idea there in this context?
Broadly, it's the notion of pushing through the system's inherent contradictions, rather than trying to optimize your position within them. Instead of just tinkering with the bars of your cage, making your servitude slightly more efficient or comfortable.
You accelerate the internal tensions, the contradictions within capitalism itself, hoping to push it towards a point of rupture or transformation.
That's one reading, yes. It involves recognizing that sometimes individual optimization, finding ways to cope better within the existing broken system, might actually delay the necessary collective pressure needed for fundamental structural change. It's a provocative idea. Hashtag tag 5.2, practical resistance strategies.
Okay, so we have these alternative philosophies. But how do we translate that into tangible practice? What are concrete steps someone can take to actively reject this self-help framework in their daily life?
Great question. Moving from the abstract to the practical, one crucial starting point is engaging in value system archaeology.
Archaeology. Digging up old values.
Kind of. It's the rigorous, sometimes uncomfortable process of uncovering your conditioned values, the things society, capitalism, advertising, your parents told you were important, and distinguishing them from your truly chosen intrinsic values.
So figuring out whose script you're actually following.
Exactly. You have to dig down and ask, whose aspirations am I actually working towards? Do I truly want the corner office, the fancy car, the optimized life? Or was I conditioned to want those external symbols of success? What brings me genuine intrinsic meaning, separate from what the market or the culture taught me to desire? It requires deep honesty.
That sounds like hard work in itself.
It is, but it's foundational. Next, practically, we need to embrace limitation.
Embracing limits. That sounds like the opposite of self-help.
It is. Instead of seeing biological and material constraints as moral failures to be overcome, we need to reframe them. See them as creative parameters, as the boundaries that define the field of play.
So things like needing 8 hours of sleep, or having only 24 hours in a day, or having a particular personality type, or your physical genetics.
These aren't weaknesses. They're just the fixed elements of reality that you have to work with, not constantly fight against. The self-help narrative frames constraints as personal failings. We need to reclaim them as simply the defining features of being human, the parameters within which we create meaningful lives.
Okay, archaeology, embrace limitations. What else?
And finally, and maybe most importantly, consciously shift the primary source of meaning and fulfillment, move towards community-based fulfillment.
Getting meaning from the group, like Ubuntu suggested.
Yes. Actively reject the obsession with purely individual, quantifiable achievements. Focus instead on building collective meaning and contributing to shared well-being, engaging in relational repair, participating in mutual aid. Your worth isn't defined by your personal productivity score or your optimization level.
But by your presence, your participation, your connection within a shared human endeavor.
Exactly. Finding meaning not in standing out, but in belonging. So let's try to bring all these different threads, the axioms, the contradictions, the deceptions, the alternatives together into one final critical synthesis. What is the ultimate deception here?
What's the big picture takeaway?
The ultimate deception is that this entire system presents itself as the pathway to maximum personal freedom, empowerment, and authenticity, while its actual functional role in society is to enforce and normalize capitalist realism.
Capitalist realism. Remind us of that term again.
Coined by the late Mark Fisher, it's that pervasive, suffocating sense that there are simply no viable alternatives to the current socioeconomic structure of capitalism. It's Easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism, as the saying goes.
And how does self-help enforce that?
It doesn't offer you freedom from the system. It offers you better cage decoration as freedom. You get the illusion of choice. You're free to choose which productivity app to use, which organic smoothie to drink, which guru to follow, which optimization technique to apply.
But you're not truly free to question or reject the underlying premise of perpetual striving, competition, and optimization within the capitalist framework itself. The cage remains. You just get to personalize it a bit.
Exactly. So let's quickly recap who holds the power, who benefits from this arrangement. Capital gets what it needs. Compliant, self-disciplining, self-optimizing labor that rarely complains about systemic failures because workers are too busy blaming themselves.
Okay. Who else?
The state arguably benefits from reduced demand for significant structural reform. If individuals are constantly focused on fixing themselves, they're less likely to demand systemic changes to address things like poverty, inequality, or lack of social safety nets.
Makes sense. And the obvious one.
And of course, the self-help industry itself gets a dream scenario. A perpetual, self-renewing market based entirely on endlessly manufacturing and then promising to soothe the feeling of inadequacy.
It's a closed loop that benefits those three key players.
Largely, yes. So the final step to real freedom, the step beyond just optimizing within the cage, requires rejecting the fundamental premise. It requires recognizing that the current game, the game of constant competitive self-optimization for market success, is not the only game in town. It's just one possible game, and maybe a rigged one at that.
The mental prison, then, isn't maintained by actual bars.
It's maintained primarily by your own belief, often unconsciously absorbed, that the cage is the entire world, that there is no outside.
But there might be.
There might be. And maybe, just maybe, you are allowed to stop running. You're allowed to question the race itself.
And that's our deep dive for this week.
Remember, the most dangerous illusion is the one you don't know you're in.
But now you know. So here's our question for you. So we've torn apart the machinery of modern self-help. Now the real question is, what is the one empowering belief you've held on to that you're finally ready to put on the chopping block?
Let us know in the comments.
Question the narrative. Deconstruct the dogma. See the system.
We'll see you next time. Stay skeptical.